What is going on, Spanko squad, and welcome back to the channel. This year marks the 20th anniversary of Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, and to celebrate, we're spending an entire month revisiting the decks of the GX era, all while trying to make them as competitive as possible. Now let's be real, some of these decks are gonna put up a fight, and some might not. But we're here to push them to their limit. Whether it's Heroes, Cyber Dragons, Crystal Beasts, or even the really obscure stuff, we're giving them all a shot. And if you want access to every deck profile I'll be showing this month, plus exclusive access to 4 deck lists that will not be shown here on YouTube, check out the Metafy GX month package. For just $10, you'll have access to this package for life. And that includes any updates and any changes made to these deck lists. It's the best way to keep up to date with all your favorite decks while also supporting the channel. Hit that like button, subscribe if you guys haven't already, and with that, let's get into GX month. So welcome back to another GX month deck profile, and today we're showcasing none other than Dark World. Now Dark World is a weird one. It's a deck where a character didn't really play it, but they kind of played themselves. If you guys don't remember, in Yu-Gi-Oh! GX, the Dark World was a place where Jaden and the friends went, and then essentially they really just wanted to use super polymerization, had to do with the whole Supreme King stuff, and the Dark World monsters played themselves. I think it was Brow or Brawn that was kind of the head of everything. So Dark World is a GX archetype, funny enough. It's an archetype that was used in GX, and that's why we're putting it into GX month. Now I think this deck is really good for a variable of different reasons. Mainly it's a deck that can hand loop, which is really good in today's format. So let's get into the deck profile. I'm going to be talking about the cards and what they do and how we can get our hand loop combos going off. And even after you hand loop, there are some plays in the extra deck that you guys can do where even if you're not able to fully hand loop your opponent, let's say they end on 1 card or 2 cards, whatever it is, then you're still able to set up a board where those 2 cards are not enough to beat you, right? So first things first is we are playing 3 Rainbow over King of Dark World. Now Rainbow has a really cool effect where you can special summon it by returning a level 7 or lower Dark World monster you control to your hand, and this is from your graveyard, by the way. And if this card is discarded by a card effect, you can add a level 5 or higher Dark World monster from your deck to your hand except itself. Then if it was discarded to your hand by an opponent's card effect, you can special summon a level 4 or lower Dark World monsters from your deck or graveyard to either field. So I know that's a lot, but I'm going to make it make sense very quickly for you guys. What these Dark World cards do, and this applies to most of the Dark World monsters over here, is they have 2 effects when they're discarded. 1, if you discard them, they do something. And then 2, if your opponent's discarding them, then you have an additional effect. And this comes up because there are cards in this deck that make it so that your opponent's monsters technically discard them. So you're getting those additional effects as well. Speaking of another Dark World monster, we are playing 3 Genta. Genta is one of the most important cards in the deck. So you can only special summon Genta once per turn. You can discard this card to the graveyard and add a Gates of the Dark World from your deck to your hand. And then if this card is banished and you control a Dark World card, you can special summon this card. So you guys know me, I'm a big Dino guy, and it reminds me a lot of Giant Rex, where it gets you the summon when it's banished, but then on top of that, what this does get you is your field spell, which is one of the most important field spells in this deck, just to get through your deck a lot faster. So 3 Genta, you really want to get to this as quickly as possible. Then we're playing 2 Grapha. Grapha is one of the old school ones. Now this card just says you can special summon it from your graveyard by returning a Dark World monster you control to the hand, except for itself, of course. And then if this card is discarded by card effect, you can target a card your opponent controls, destroy it. Kind of better when you're going second, it kind of pops cards, but when you're going first as well, it actually clears their board. Spoiler alert, you're going to be putting monsters on your opponent's side of the field. So Grapha actually helps you kind of just pop those cards and get rid of them after a while. And then if this card was discarded by opponent's card effect, then you can look at 1 card in your opponent's hand, and then if it was a monster, you can special summon it to your side of the field. So it gives you that link fodder plays as well. It also gets cards out of their hand. So it's kind of like it's not a hand loop per se, but it kind of hand loops your opponent because you get hand knowledge and you get to take a card out of their hand, which is nice. Then we are playing 2 Silva. This is what generates the entire hand loop. Silva is an absolutely insane card. If this card is discarded to the graveyard by a card effect, you special summon this card. However, remember that I mentioned they all have a second effect if they're discarded by an opponent's card effect. So Silva is essentially what gets the hand loops going, because if this is discarded by your opponent's card effect, then your opponent has to place exactly 2 cards from their hand to the bottom of their deck in any order. Now, this is a card that I want to talk about, and why this is just really good, but you also have to play very smart with Silva, is it says in the card text that you have to discard exactly 2 cards. So it's not really going to work if your opponent has 1 card in hand, but honestly, if you're at the point where your opponent has 1 card in hand, it doesn't matter anyways. Your opponent is always going to start with 5. Let's say you're going first, your opponent's going to have 5 cards. If you use Silva twice, because keep in mind, a lot of these older GX cards do not have hard ones per turn effects. So if you use Silva twice, you're hand ripping from 4 there. And if you end up getting Grapha effect off somewhere, then you're also going to be taking a monster from their hand, which is exactly 5 cards. But even if you don't get the Grapha, you're at least getting 4, and the board you're going to be able to makes it so that last card plus whatever they draw is never going to be enough, right? So Silva, of course. Then we're playing 3 Snow. Snow is actually pretty confusing
confusing in terms of its text, but I'm just going to break it down for you guys. Essentially, if it's discarded, you can add a Dark World card from your deck to your hand. Any Dark World card, that's why we're playing 3, because it adds pretty much anything that you're missing. But if it's discarded by an opponent's card effect, then you can actually special summon a monster in the graveyard. Again, that's not going to be coming up that often. The main one you're using this for is just to search, and again, it's not a hard once per turn, which is insane on Snow. And then lastly, for the monsters, we are playing the one Ceruli. This is the card that's going to be summoning itself to your opponent's side of the field if it's discarded by card effect. And then when it summons itself, your opponent has to discard a card. But in this case, because now it's on your opponent's side of the field, you discard a card. So remember how I was talking about with something like Silva, if your opponent's card makes you discard, then you get the effect to hand loop. That's exactly what Ceruli is doing. You're going to summon it to your opponent's side of the field. It's going to be able to trigger, which means now you have to discard a card. And then what that's going to do is it's going to activate all the secondary effects of your Dark World monsters, which is insane. So Ceruli is really good. There's also another card in here that does that for you, but Ceruli's the Dark World card that does it for you, which is nice. Then for the rest of the Dark World cards, we are playing one Dark Corridor. This is kind of like a Rhoda for the deck. You're only playing one because it is a hard once per turn on the activation. It just, you add a Dark World monster from your deck to your hand, and then you discard a card. Still very good for consistency. One Dark World Ascension. Ascension is really good to get into your Grapha and your extra deck. The Grapha is one of the endport pieces that you wouldn't want to be making, but essentially during your main phase, you can fusion summon a Fiend monster from your extra deck by banishing materials from your field or graveyard. And then if you fusion summon a Dark World monster using this card, you can also discard monsters as material. So it's really cool because it gets the discard effects off for all this, but it also banishes cards like Genta if it's already in the graveyard, which is nice. And then you get the Genta effect off to summon itself back. Also, this card has a really cool effect where during your main phase, if this card's in your graveyard, you can add it back to your hand, then discard a Dark World monster. So it's really good because it recycles itself back, which is why we're only playing the one. We're also playing 2 Gates of the Dark World. Gates obviously is searchable off Genta. Gates is also an insane card because it has a really cool effect where once per turn, you can banish a Fiend monster from your graveyard, discard 1 Fiend monster, then draw 1 card. So this also banishes your Genta, which is nice. It kind of sets itself up, which is nice, but then it also lets you draw and discard a card. Now, I do want to say, this is a once per turn, but it's not a hard once per turn. So if you have 2 Gates of the Dark World, you activate your first one, activate its effect, cool. Then you're going to activate the second one, you can activate its effect as well, and you're going to be able to use it twice there. So I do like playing 2 Gates of the Dark World. And that's it for the Dark World engine over here, but there is one more engine that I want to talk about that essentially is like a pseudo Dark World engine. It just works so well. You guys might have noticed that there's no normal summon necessarily in this deck. So this is the best normal summon in the deck. 3 Gen, 1 Ken, and then 1 reinforcements of the army, of course, searching these cards, right? So it's essentially extra copies. Now, Gen and Ken are really, really good. If you guys don't know what these cards do, long story short, Gen and Ken have really cool effects when they're normal summon. You can summon the other one to your opponent's side of the field, and then they get effects off based off what they're summoned, right? So Gen has an effect where if this card is special summoned by the effect of Ken, you can discard a card. Now, while that's not bad, because if you go normal summon Ken, you can get Gen to your opponent's side of the field, and then your opponent has to discard a card. It kind of hand loops in that sense. It's actually better to play 3 Gen and 1 Ken, because Gen is actually the one you're going to be normal summoning. The reason for that is because Ken has the effect where if this card is special summoned by the effect of Gen, your opponent draws 2 cards, then discards 1 card. So remember how I talked about Ceruli having the effect where it makes it so your opponent makes you discard? Ken also has that same effect. If I normal summon Gen, summon Ken to my opponent's side of the field, now I get to draw 2 cards and discard a card. Now let's say I discard a card like Rainbow or Silva. Now Silva's going to be able to hand loop. Snow, I get the additional effect. So Ken and Gen are really, really good. It's the only normal summon of the deck, but it's just very, very powerful in themselves, and that's why I like playing Gen and Ken. These are the honorary Dark World monsters. Next up, we are playing a Danger package, and Danger is essentially synonymous with Dark World at this point because the Danger cards work so well. They all activate their effects and then discard monsters from your hand. So if you open Dangers plus Dark Worlds, it's really, really good in combination. So we're playing 2 Danger Nessie, 2 Danger Mothman, 2 Tsuchinoku, as well as 2 Jackalope. These are, in my opinion, the best ones to play. Mothman I really like actually because it's a level 4, so you can go into some rank 4 plays in your deck, which is really good because you have some really powerful rank 4s. But Nessie, Tsuchinoko, Jackalope, and Mothman, essentially these are all just consistency pieces for you. They all activate in hand. So essentially, if you guys don't know, they all kind of have like a similar effect where you reveal it, and then if your opponent randomly chooses a card from your hand, and then they discard that chosen card. Then if it was not this card, you special summon this card. So all of them have that effect, and then they all have separate effects when they're the cards that are being discarded. Danger Jackalope has the effect where if it's the one that's discarded, then you can summon a Danger from your deck. Tsuchinoko has the effect where if it's the one that's discarded, you can summon it from your graveyard. So Tsuchinoko is good because it guarantees you a body. The thing with Tsuchinoko though, and I guess this happens with all of them, if they summon from hand, you get to draw a card. Tsuchinoko, if it's summoned from grave, it doesn't actually draw a card, but it still gets the body onto your side of the field. Mothman has the effect where if this is a card that's discarded, both players draw a card, then both players discard a card. Of course, that works really well with Dark Worlds. And then Nessie finally has a really cool effect where if it's the one that's discarded, you can add a danger card from your deck to your hand. Any danger card, which is really good, gets you into any one of these. Just more consistency for the deck. Now lastly, to round off this deck, it is 40 cards in the deck, but it is just some more consistency for the deck. We talked about the dangers, being able to draw cards. They also put themselves on the board for link plays and whatnot, but you have some more consistency outside of that. So we're playing 2 Allure of Darkness. Everything in this deck is dark, so Allure of Darkness is pretty good just to draw extra cards. It sucks banishing cards sometimes. It's not bad if you can banish a Genta, like if you have an extra Genta, so it's not bad in that sense, but generally Allure is just really good to draw 2 cards. 3 Triple Tactics Talent. This card is insane, like absolutely crazy in Dark World, because remember I mentioned you're going to be summoning monsters to your opponent's side of the field, which means they're going to be activating effects. So if you summon your Ceruli, if you summon your Gen, well then Ken on your opponent's side of the field, they're going to be triggered on your opponent's side of the field, which means now if I go Triple Tactics Talent, I can use the effect to either draw more cards, or if I've already hand looped 4, I can use Talent to hand loop the very last card, right? So Talents is very, very good. Also, the really cool thing about Talents and Dark World in general is hand traps are not very good against this deck. And I say that because if my opponent is using hand traps, then they're already discarding cards out of their hand. And if I only really need to loop you for 2 then at that point, or 3 potentially, right? So Talents is really good, plays into opponent's hand traps, plays into you can set it off yourself, which is really good, which is why we're playing 3. We're playing 3 Book of Eclipse, of course. We don't have room for hand traps ourselves, but Book of Eclipse is still quite good just as a board breaker going second. And then lastly, 1 Called by the Grave, of course, here. Just a really good 40th card. Most decks are going to main this. It's just absolutely insane in today's format. Honestly, in every format since it's come out, Called by the Grave has been good. So that's it for the main deck. It's 40 cards in the main deck. So moving on to the extra deck here, we are playing 2 Grapha Dragon Overload of the Dark World. Now, Grapha is really, really good for a couple of reasons. One, it has a really cool effect, which kind of works as a Omni Negate. Now, it's not necessarily an Omni Negate. How it reads is when your opponent activates a monster effect or a normal spell or trap card while you have a card in your hand, so you can have any card in your hand, you can activate this effect. That card's effect becomes your opponent discards 1 card. So let's say your opponent activates a Dark Corridor as an example, just because I have this. Let's say your opponent activates this randomly in the mirror match, which that'd be crazy if that happened. What you could do is you could activate Grapha effect. This card's effect now becomes your opponent discards a card. So let's say I have a Silva in my hand, and now they make me discard the Silva. Silva is going to get to trigger to summon itself, but also because it was discarded by an opponent's card effect, it's going to be able to hand loop my opponent. So it's really cool because Grapha essentially acts as an Omni Negate for you. While it's not traditionally and actually like an Omni Negate, Grapha is really good because essentially it stops your opponent from doing anything and it benefits you. And then on top of that, Grapha has a really cool effect where if it leaves the field because of an opponent's card, you can special summon a regular Grapha that is either banished or in your graveyard. And that's cool because it recycles itself. Plus we're playing 2 because Ascension puts itself back in your hand, which means you can summon Grapha twice, which is nice. 1 Hope Harbinger for the rank 8 plays with your Rainbow and your Grapha, 1 Baguska, 1 Dugaris, and 1 Dweller. These come up here and there. They're pretty powerful when they do come up. Dweller in this format actually is really, really good, so I really like these rank 4s. 1 Underworld Goddess. Now this card is really good because you can put a lot of bodies on the field, and this kind of breaks boards with like Chaos Angel and whatnot. But a card that I think could be really good in junction or in replacement of Underworld Goddess is actually Abao. I think Abao is a very, very powerful card. I just don't have one on hand, but I'm gonna put that in the masterclass actually. When you guys see the deck list, in that deck list it'll show this card, but it'll show Abao. Abao is a very good card in Dark World. I just don't have one, guys, but Underworld Goddess is still really good to deal with a lot of pesky boss monsters. We're playing on 1 star Yugioh, of course, amazing in Dark World. 1 Nightmare Griffin. This is another card that I was talking about where if you hand loop your opponent and they only have 1 or 2 cards, it's very hard to play because a lot of the time you're going to be ending on like something like this with Skull Dread plus Nightmare Griffin, or any Link 2 monster on top plus Griffin. And Griffin is very good because it's like a pseudo floodgate for you, so that's why I really like the Nightmare Griffin here. So that's why I'm playing it, because it's one of those just floodgates that you add on top of your board once you hand loop your opponent. Then we're playing 1 Dark, of course. We're playing all Darks, 1 SP, 1 IP, 1 Muckcracker, 1 Akashic, and 1 Security Dragon. For anyone who doesn't know, Security Dragon and Akashic have kind of a similar effect where you kind of bounce cards that your opponent controls back to your hand, and that's important because you're putting cards like Ceruli onto your opponent's side of the field. And the reason you play these actually is really cool because if you guys didn't know, Ceruli is not a hard once per turn. So you summon this usually in front of the extra monster zone, you make a Akashic, you put it back in your hand, you discard it, you summon it again, you discard another card. So Ceruli is really good to abuse, and these cards help you abuse it. But that's it for the extra deck, guys. 15 cards. Again, the only thing that I could consider is Abao. Abao is a very, very powerful card right now, but I think this extra deck is still very, very powerful as is.
So that is it for today's video. I hope you guys did enjoy. That is my take on Dark World for the March 2025 format. Now keep in mind, the month of March is going to be themed strictly around GX archetypes. Now while Dark World isn't technically an archetype played by a character, it is still one of the coolest archetypes to come out of GX, just because of that whole Supreme King arc and whatnot. There are so many cool things that Dark World can do in today's format, which is why I really enjoy the deck, and I'm happy to be bringing it to you guys today. So thank you guys all for watching. Again, if you guys did enjoy, make sure to like and subscribe for more content like this one. March is going to be all GX themed content, but we have a ton of other content that we do here on the channel. So if you guys want to stay tuned in for all of that, make sure to subscribe. And with that, guys, I appreciate every single one of you. Spanko, signing out. Peace.
Get up, we want you to get on your feet.